The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. I hope you're all well and not too bored of being stuck at home. I just want to give a brief message to say this episode is sponsored by CECF, that's the Central European Cannabis Forum. CECF has a large online conference coming up on the 9th to 10th of June, looking at Poland and also the wider Central and Eastern European medical cannabis markets. Poland is actually currently the third biggest medical cannabis market in Europe, so it's an important forerunner in this emerging sector. The event will have panels looking at politics, the view from Polish doctors, Polish supply chain, panels on the wider region, as well as views from many of the biggest international experts in the industry with extensive knowledge of growing the market up until this point. The event will also have a virtual expo as well as networking facilities for all registered guests. I'm actually also going to be speaking on a panel which will be looking at cannabis media and communications. And I also look forward to speaking to the experts shaping the cannabis market in a country I've not really focused much on in this show yet. Listeners of the show can also access a 20% discount on tickets. Just go to the link in the show notes to register. Anyway, on with the show. Enjoy. On today's show, I have Will Muecke. Will is co-founder and managing member of Artemis Growth Partners. Artemis are a private equity firm focused on ESG and impact investing in the cannabis industry. Will, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So how are you getting on during these bizarre times?
Yeah, they are bizarre times, aren't they? First of all, I just want to say my deep gratitude to the NHS and all the frontline workers. As you and I were talking before the show, it's a bit of a weird situation to be at home with my family and really having a very enjoyable staycation of sorts. I have two teenagers here, and I probably wouldn't see them very much were it not for the situation. So there's a dissonance between kind of my experience here in the house and what's going on outside. So it's a little bit weird that way. But we've been very busy. We've been very busy through the COVID crisis and continue to be so.
Yeah, very similar things to myself, actually, and a few of the guests I've been talking to as well. It's, the world around seems to be collapsing, but we've got a nice situation, spending a bit more time with the family. Although I can't say that 100% of the time. But
Fair enough.
Yeah. Cool. So look, we'll usually start with just a bit about your background, but I thought maybe before that, could you just very briefly say what ESG and impact investing is?
Sure. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. From our standpoint, come down from the UN and the IFC. And so there are protocols for how to invest in sort of more sustainable and hopefully more regenerative businesses with an eye towards what we used to call sort of a triple bottom line. So trying to do a little bit more than just profit, although profit is still central to the core, but trying to make, hopefully, the world a better place through investment.
Fantastic. Good. Thank you. So then maybe we can just build up to Artemis, but a bit of your backstory on, what were you doing before? And how did you come to set up Artemis Growth?
Sure. Cut me off if I'm too long because I can ramble on. So I guess all the way back, I and my fellow partners who founded Artemis, we're all out of the traditional investment banking and finance area. So I come out of Goldman Sachs. My last station there was managing director and global co-head of the healthcare services sector within the global healthcare group. And I used to run that sector out of New York and left in 2008 to form a private equity group called CoreCo Private Equity, which was a foray into impact investing backed by a group of the development banks around the world, including World Bank and the IFC, and then the governments of Norway, Switzerland, Belgium, Germany, and the Inter-American Development Bank, plus a group of ultra-high net worth individuals and family offices. So I really broke into impact investing because that's frankly where I just wanted to spend my time. I think that the three partners coming together for Artemis all have that sort of same personal story going into, using their skills in what we hope is a better way or a way to build a better world. And then my foray into cannabis, we were fully invested at CoreCo in mid-2017. And as a jumping off point into a new opportunity, one of our partners had been really since 2015 investing in cannabis. He was also from Goldman Sachs, left to start a dispensary. He structured and provided seed capital for a license that's now up and running as a dispensary in the Maryland area. Also worked for a group of, funny enough, Goldman diaspora at Columbia Care. So Nick Vita, who runs Columbia Care, was an associate in the healthcare group when I was the managing director. So there's like a little weird Goldman cabal in there. But I have a bit of a personal backstory, which is, cannabis for us really is a true impact category. We got into the space because I think each of us have personal stories. Mine is really centered around my sister and my mother. I lost my sister to cancer in 2007 and my mother in 2009. So I had my annus horribilis. And what was really impactful, not to use that word in the wrong way, but was really sort of life-changing for me, is my sister was living in California at the time. And sorry, this is actually going back to a long time ago. So she, in her last stages of life, had deep bone pain. The cancer had progressed into her sacrum and was on fentanyl lollipops for self-titrating of opioids. And she then had a teenager, a little 6-year-old boy and 2 twin 4-year-old girls. And I don't know if you've ever seen anybody on opioids for that type of pain treatment, but they're kind of they're not there. And because of the laws in California, the compassionate medical access laws, she first had access to Marinol and then to flour. And it didn't just change her life, it changed the entire life of the family, because she kind of came back to us and was able to titrate back off of opioids. And it was a lightning bolt to me then, just that, cannabis wasn't, kids giggling behind the gym after school. It truly was a medicinal category. And so I think that from those early days, the contrast with my mother didn't have that on the East Coast. She was in New York, and just a very different end of life story. So I think that our passion for cannabis really starts with that personal orientation. And then we look at, the opportunities in cannabis that really touch on social justice and the exit to the opioid crisis and regenerative farming and an overall just giant category of health and wellness. And so we found this to be something that really kind of pulled on our heartstrings, as well as created a financial opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really like a lot about what you said. Some of my personal motivations are, I'm not come from a financial investment background, but the impact aspect is very big, both from health perspective, but also the amazing sustainability qualities of hemp and the cannabis plant in general.
Absolutely.
Cool. So yeah, that's great. Thank you. So one of the big reasons you're on the show to talk about, you guys have just closed a very big deal. I think one of the biggest, if not the biggest, European M&A deal in cannabis. Correct me if I'm wrong, north of $100 million for the Bridge Farm Group. Yeah. Would you mind telling us a bit more about that? It's really exciting.
Sure. So we announced the deal. It hasn't yet closed. We expect it to close by the end of the month. But it was an opportunity that really came along because, frankly, even before the deal itself, David Ball, who's the founding family of Bridge Farm and was the former CEO of Bridge Farm, and he sold the business to Sundial, less than a year ago. He joined Artemis as an operating partner, first as an advisor and then as an operating partner. And then it was really with sort of Sundial's own activities to restructure their balance sheet that the business came up for sale. So we jumped at the opportunity of effectively doing a management buyout. So the existing management team plus David participated in the equity of the deal. We're coming in with obviously a cannabis angle, but overall, Bridge Farm itself is a standalone, horticulture supply chain company. They do large-scale cultivation for some of the supermarkets here and the large box chain retailers, as well as the online nursery entities and plant entities. And we saw Bridge Farm as a cornerstone to not just a cannabis play, but really a plant-based wellness play. And, when we talk about cannabis, while we are, as a private equity fund, 100% focused on the plant, we think that the category of health and wellness itself is just, growing exponentially. And the opportunity for people really not just living longer, but living better is a huge, huge driver for how we see this business evolving. So while cannabis is a big anchor in the economic story of Bridge Farm, we do see that other medicinal herbs and plant wellness compounds can come out of the business and go into what we think is just a very robust and growing category.
Yeah, very interesting angle as well. Actually, it's wider than cannabis, which I always think is a good thing. Would you tell us a bit more about some of the assets that you're buying? Because I know that the Bridge Farm guys have just finished a very expensive state-of-the-art greenhouse. Is that right?
Yeah, so they have about 2 million square feet of cultivation space currently. Their base business is really ornamental plants, cut flowers, and edible herbs. And they serve folks like Tesco and Morrison's and Aldi and Lidl. On a low-cost basis, they're such an efficient producer that they grow and sell cut tulips back to Holland. So they do at a massive scale, or profitable at that scale. And so, at its heart, really, cannabis is just another agricultural commodity, if you think about it. There's a lot of other complexities that go beyond that. So I don't want to reduce it only to that one element. But when you think about low cost, high quality cultivation, it wouldn't be our first thought to do something in the UK, but the UK is going to be a very large and growing market. We also think that the UK can be a base of export. And partnering with a group like Bridge Farm that has these assets and knows how to operate on large scale and do it profitably, as we see over time, likely cannabis margins to fall, we think that's a good partner to be with. And then when you add to that, again, even before this deal and even before Sundial, Bridge Farm was already moving to the plant wellness space. I think their retail relationships and the opportunity of selling, again, plant supplements and other products for health and wellness into those large chain retailers, it's a way that we see to affect a very large scale population and bring health and wellness to the masses.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, we've had a few people on the show to sort of talk about various parts of the supply chain, and actually that distribution piece seems very, very crucial. So having existing relationships with those huge retailers is a real massive bonus, I suppose.
Absolutely. When you think about Artemis and our sort of origin, our themes haven't really changed. So we invest in really brands, in distribution, in low-cost cultivation, but it really has to be low-cost cultivation going into value-added product because we don't want to just be on the bleeding edge of commoditization. And in ancillary businesses, and that can be everything from CROs or more service-oriented businesses to technology and device. And so Bridge Farm really hits across a couple of those categories. We think there's a branded opportunity in the future as well. And as I was saying earlier, the network around Bridge Farm for the assets that we already have, we think there's a lot of synergy there. So for example, in Europe, we're an investor in a group called Orium, which is going to be the sort of the first independent extraction company in Europe, very much like a Valens or a Medifarm. They're based in Denmark. They're pre-revenue right now, but they're going to have licensing by the end of this year and move into full production into 2021. And then we have an investment in a UK company that has operating assets in the Czech Republic, but it's a CMO, it's a contract manufacturing organization that can do everything from, honestly, it's pharma into veterinary into tinctures and edibles and topicals, health and wellness, beauty. So when we look at kind of the constellation of the assets that we've been investing in, Bridge Farm is kind of a very complementary fit to our existing portfolio, both in Europe and then worldwide.
Fantastic. So if we could dig in a bit more about the potential plans for around cannabis. So I guess will it all be indoor? What are you kind of looking to do? Are you looking at medical products or more wellness? It feels like it's more wellness, but...
So, I mean, I guess beyond Bridge Farm, the way that we look at cannabis is that it really is multimodal. We almost break it down by region more than anything else right now at this stage of the game. And these are kind of gross generalizations that have a lot of nuance behind it. So I'm not trying to step over the nuance. But where we've been investing in the past in North America, it's really been much more of a CPG play, sort of a consumer packaged goods play. The evolution of the market is going to be much more sort of, I say this very lightly because there's great product, but it's a little bit more that what's on the label is almost more important than what's in the can. So if you think about sort of Coke and Pepsi, the orientation around adult use has been very much focused on brand. As it relates to the cannabis flower itself, we actually see a bifurcation in the US market. We see that there's going to be sort of large scale producers that are effectively just creating basically consumer API. So it's either going to be ground into sort of non-bud based flower, or it's going to be extracted and going into a number of categories, health and wellness, certainly, sort of matching intoxication on the alcohol side, but going into beauty, going into consumer food, going to supplements. It's really a disruptive category. But we see that the US is really taking almost a brand approach. As we look at Europe, Europe is much different because the only way you have access to cannabis in Europe is through a doctor's script. So it's much more of a drug delivery or pharma model. And so with that, we think that data and testing is going to be critical. One of the key kind of choke points right now is just patient enrollment and trying to get doctor education rolling more quickly so physicians are prescribing more scripts. That's a real bottleneck right now. So we see that, the US may be CPG and brand based, but the value chain that's going to be built in Europe is going to be data-driven, high regulation, which we completely back and believe in, and basically data and results-based, efficacy-based promotion.
Yeah, I guess that's a symptom of the slightly different approach we have in Europe, but also the maturity of the respective markets vis-a-vis North America. And so if you're going to be cultivating in the UK, I mean, in the UK, you can't use the buds. So are you guys getting those kind of licenses from the Home Office, etc.?
So the Bridge Farm itself right now has an industrial hemp license for cultivation, and clearly you can't use flower or leaves. So everything goes from seed and stalk or goes into fiber. The company also has one of 12 R&D licenses. I think the only other sort of quasi-commercial or commercial organization is GW Pharma. The other 10 R&D holders are all academic institutions. And we see over time that R&D license will morph into a commercial license where we can cultivate high THC cannabis and either extract or export either GACP or EGMP flower or compounds into other jurisdictions or sell locally here in the UK. But the regulation hasn't come yet. And we think that it's a very arcane series of circumstances with the laws today. It's a little bit strange to think that even on a hemp plant where you have less than 0.3 or 0.2% THC, that you can't extract from flower or from leaves. And I think that what the R&D license paves the way for, and ultimately a commercial license, is that you can use the leaves and the flower to extract as long as you're able to remove THC from the end product, if you're going to sell, for example, a CBD product. So we see that there are upcoming opportunities, but it's going to take a little while. And again, we're investing to be very patient and just help the industry grow, but not promise anything outlandish or wild as far as what we can do immediately, because there certainly is a regulatory process to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. And it feels quite savvy that you've got a very meaningful business with meaningful revenues whilst developing this almost in the background, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's beyond just the revenues. I mean, it's obviously very helpful to have a company that's already profitable, but the team here is really kind of the jewel in the crown if you think about it, because David, when he was at the company or before he even sold it to Sundial, was already developing the expertise for cannabis production, for extraction, and that was essential oils beyond cannabis as well. And so there's been a tremendous amount of dialogue and product development within Bridge Farm even before this transaction. So, we're backing those early leads that we see as being very good seeds to grow from the future. And yeah, it's nice to have an existing business that in and of itself, I think for us will be an area of potential expansion because, unfortunately, the economic wreckage that COVID is wreaking on the economy, it will actually create some opportunities in the legacy business for, additional M&A or just new business lines to come, that the horticulture side without going into the cannabis side.
Yeah, that makes sense. So obviously some of it's, incumbent on regulations changing / you acquiring the right licenses. Would you look to something like EU GMP to kind of get it into that sort of medical high grade sphere at some point?
Yeah, for sure. I think that when we look at the existing plant, sort of easy discussion would be to continue to invest and support an extraction facility on site that is EU GMP. I think that, we've seen through some of our other portfolio companies that there is actually a GACP market as well, trading in flower, obviously not as high grade and not as high margin. And typically, preparation of the flower comes from outdoor grows, at least the sales that are happening today, not Bridge Farm sales, but elsewhere. And so you have to irradiate the flower if you want to sell into Germany, for example. But there are other opportunities before getting sort of a full-scale operation that's going to serve the UK market. You certainly can do extraction if you have the testing and the lab space in place to create product that would go to export markets. And again, that would have to be obviously licensed and regulated by the Home Office.
So lots to come. And to go back to the point that we were talking about in relation to in the UK, but also a lot of Europe not being able to use the flower and the leaves. There's obviously been a recent case with Cannavape in France.
Right, yeah.
Might hopefully point to maybe that rule being looked at again, notwithstanding Brexit and all the rest of that stuff.
I was going to say, right. The one time that we're not part of Europe, a pan-European law gets reviewed.
Yeah.
I think in the end, that's going to be very helpful as anecdotal evidence. The UK is going to do whatever the UK wants to do, especially post-Brexit. I do think that there's a rationalization of thought around cannabis. There's been a tremendous amount of activism and information that's been put out by groups for many years as to, the protocols around cannabis, how to have a transparent and safe value chain, how to protect consumers, how to make sure that you have the right safety protocols in place and the data. I think when you look at some of the elements around POCA and, the pressing of flower and leaves, it seems so arcane. It seems like something from, another century. It is from another century. Mm. And so the hope would be that, there will be more diligence on some of those existing barriers and just people will realize that they need to quickly fall, because the flip side is you have patients that want to have product and want to have, well-priced product. You have national health systems that are going to be supporting those patients. And so there's going to be a budgetary issue there. And then the beyond of that, which is more acute to COVID, is that you're going to have in the UK, what we're seeing in state budgets in the US, we're likely going to see, unfortunately, across economies in Europe, you're going to have giant budget gaps. And cannabis has been deemed an essential constituent product in the US as it has been across Europe during COVID. I only see that influence growing. And as people look to their budgets and see those giant budgetary holes, the revenue opportunity of cannabis is significant. And hopefully that will bring greater focus to the industry.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's loads there, isn't there? I think the analogy in regards to the kind of lunacy of having to, dispose or destroy buds and flowers is growing apple trees just for the wood and throwing away the apple, which, I think that will have to be looked at. It feels like that's a legacy of just the kind of stigma and hysteria in the way that cannabis has been dealt with generally. And it definitely needs revisiting, particularly for all those reasons that you just spelt out. And if we're going to have a focus on sustainability, and you talk about hemp sequestering CO2 much greater than lots of other crops, you also want to incentivize the farmers so that they can maximize the value they get back from that crop.
Absolutely. And like sustainability, unfortunately, I don't really like the word because frankly, if we sustain what we're doing as a society, we're going to crash the world, right? I mean, if we continue to consume the way we consume, if we continue to travel the way we travel, hopefully COVID, one of the silver linings can be that it's a giant pause button. And we can realize that we can do a lot with a lot less. We don't need to be as frenetic as a global society. We can slow down a little bit. We can take a little bit more stock in ourselves and in our neighbors. And we can be a little bit more thoughtful and helpful about how we do business. And cannabis, as I said, it disrupts so many different industries. So if you look at whether it's pulp and paper, a replacement for fiber in that industry, or if you look at textiles, cotton is an incredibly pesticide and water hungry crop, and cannabis is a regenerative and renewable crop that has, huge benefits of carbon sequestration and very low need for a lot of bad things that go into cotton production. And then you go into composites, you go, to bioplastics, and BMW is using, hemp-based bioplastics in their production line to replace carbon fiber. It's amazing what this plant can do. And you can do it on a basis that if you use the right techniques, it can be a regenerative crop. It helps with the carbon footprint, and it's also nutrient enriching for soil. So there are a lot of things that should be unlocked that we hope will be unlocked. All it takes is a little bit more focus and rational thought.
Yeah, 100%. I think hemp, unfortunately, suffers a bit of PR issues, and almost people don't know enough about it, because I think if they did, they would be welcoming it a lot more. Yeah. So hopefully that will change.
Yeah, hopefully that's true for cannabis in general, because the stigma there, it's been such a misaligned plant. And forgive me for going off on a bit of a rant, but on our social justice side, when you really think about the roots of stigma and where it comes almost primarily out of Dr. Harry Anslinger in the 30s in the US, and what is really sort of domestic colonialism, a very racist theme throughout sort of the enforcement on the drugs trade as it relates to cannabis. And especially when you have these anomalies of a Schedule 1 drug or a Schedule 1 category being applied to cannabis, when it does have a medical application and it is non-addictive, at least in the sense that we think about chemical addiction. I hate the equivalency to put this against alcohol, but alcohol has no medical benefit and is highly addictive, and yet it's something that's widely accepted in every non-Muslim society. So I think that the stigma has to fall, and it has to go on a basis of education and opportunity. And then the benefits so far outweigh the negatives. Again, I don't want to promote that blindly because we are big believers in regulation and data and testing. But I would hope that people are opening up to understanding what the roots of cannabis are as far as the stigma go, and look to wipe that away.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So we hope for many positive changes in the future. One last thing on the kind of Bridge Farm before we move on to Artemis in general is, you alluded to it earlier, but why do you think it's important to have cultivation in the UK? I mean, again, we've had quite a few people on the show talking about various different aspects, and when you talk about the commoditization of it, people often talk about low-cost equatorial regions being where a lot of it will be grown. But I personally think each country will have like an important, whether it be small or not, domestic cultivation industry. Why do you think it's important for the UK to have one?
Yeah, I think that I almost start from the smaller footprint of Bridge Farm itself. Why is it important for Bridge Farm to have its own cultivation? And a lot of that is just control over its own supply and a guarantee of biomass. I think there's going to be a tremendous explosion in biomass because of what's happening in Portugal and in Greece and in Northern Macedonia, and even our own investments in companies like Clever Leaves coming out of Colombia. I mean, super high grade, outdoor, semi-outdoor grown cannabis. But I think the unique aspect about Bridge Farm for us is we believe at scale we can compete on a price basis, and especially if we're using it in our own products, it becomes one of our sort of defensible input costs. And so I don't see, expanding tremendously just on the cultivation side to export for pure wholesale biomass. But I do see that the utilization of having your own core supply is strategic and defensible. And I think as it relates to the broader markets in the UK, again, pricing is going to be everything. And so your input costs of power and water and labor are certainly going to determine what you can price and sell at. So there's an equation there that's an ever-evolving dynamic equation that you have to look at broadly. But there is going to be a market for indoor high-end flower when markets open up here. I'm not sure when, but when they do on the recreational side, you're going to have people seeking out high-end flower just like they seek out high-end wine. If it's pharma API, you're going to have a need for a consistent and high-quality crop with certain characteristics that go into those pharma API requirements. And so there's always going to be a place for the indoor grow. And then as it relates to greenhouse and outdoor, I think there are benefits of having greenhouse grows that you do get to control the environment more than just a full open air grow. And again, if you can do it at scale and do it on a cost competitive basis, especially if you're able to add your own value to the production line, it seems to be a very smart way to play the market. But I wouldn't advocate just, go invest in any grow operation, because I do think that commoditization side is coming and it's indelible. And so if you are just doing pure biomass, I think that's a tough game to play long term.
Yeah. And I guess that's why it's quite smart that you've got a diverse group of crops that you're growing at Bridge Farm. It's, not just cannabis, it's a number of different things. So you can kind of respond to market needs a bit more. But yeah, we could talk about this for ages. But if we maybe expand the conversation a bit more to sort of generally Artemis and your strategy around that, I think, as you said, ESG and impact is massive and only becoming more important, particularly post-COVID, and priorities for everyone, both governments and individuals, are going to change. How is that kind of affecting the way that you guys go? Actually, let's take a step back. Yeah. Maybe you can explain a bit of the kind of nuts and bolts of what you guys do. So, who are your investors and what stage businesses are you looking at and what sort of subsectors are you looking at?
Sure. So I guess where we stand right now is we have about 200 million of AUM. We continuously raise capital, both as sort of independent one-off SPVs, if it's a certain deal or a certain opportunity, and we raise funds. And so I think now we manage 6 funds that range in size from, our very small sort of, our first fund was a $5 million friends and family round. We, the partners, put up $2.5 million. We literally had friends and family put in $2.5 million. And the promise was, we may lose everything, so we're not going to charge you fees. You keep all the fees, you keep all the carry. We just want the track record. That fund, even through COVID, right now is up, almost 60 or 70% since inception, which just talks about the resilience of the cannabis market and sort of where we played early on. But we're continuing to raise money. We see ultimately there, again, I got to be careful about being grandiose, but because there are limits. But it feels right now that the investable category of cannabis is only growing. And if you look at sort of the Wall Street research, and if you squint, I always say, look at the research, cut it in half and cut it in half again. But you still come up with a worldwide market that by 2025 is 100 billion. I mean, we've heard crazy numbers like, $1 trillion market. So it doesn't even have to be 100 billion. It can be 20 billion. It can be, a couple of billion, and it's still an attractive market to play in. But what's also very attractive is that the industry itself is growing at sort of 20 to 25% a year, and consistent growth backed by real revenues. It feels, we've talked about like the internet and the bubble around sort of cannabis valuations. The difference here is that, there was a $40 billion, at least North American, illegal trade in cannabis before the legal market started off. And so you're really just converting illegal dollars to legal dollars, or unregulated dollars to regulated dollars. And so we see that the opportunity is really quite interesting and quite vast. So that's a little bit on the money side, is that we're going to continue to raise capital. We don't see our activities really slowing down. If anything, we feel they're accelerating. And what that means for us, as I said from the outset, we used to take more of an economic strip approach. So when we had very little capital, we were kind of investing in other people's deals and just playing the companies that we felt kind of fit our ESG and impact parameters. We didn't really have any influence. We said, for example, GTI, the founders there, Ben Kovler and Pete Cadence, were really of the same fiber, and what they wanted to do with their business really resonated with us. So it was more of a philosophical alignment than it was, us putting protocols in place for the company. But now that we're moving to larger dollars and taking more either leadership position in investment rounds or even leading rounds or buying companies, the impetus is to really enforce more of a metric for what does ESG and impact mean. And going back to my former fund, CoreCo, we won in 2017, we won a Best for the World ESG category rating for the GEARS. It's the Global Impact Investment Rating System. It's a B Corp affiliate. And it was because we effectively just applied UN and IFC protocols to our investments. And we don't see really any difference in cannabis. If anything, we see that this is a way of putting in the cornerstone of the industry what we hope are kind of the right values. As an impact investor, it bugs me that I kind of have to say I'm an impact investor, like I have an asterisk, because what we do is really what every single company can do. There's nothing special about gender equality in the workforce. There's nothing special about, fewer OSHA violations and work hazard violations. There's nothing special about promoting, social justice, inclusion. We think holistically about how a business runs, and we do take care of our customers. That's really our commercial relationship. But we also take care of our vendors, we take care of our employees, we take care of our community, and we take care of our investors. It's really a holistic, systematic approach to how we should invest. And there's frankly no reason that anybody else in the world can't do what we do. So I always look the other way. I was like, I'd love to have, this just be called business. And if you're not doing impact business, you have a tax, you have a star, or there's some sort of asterisk on your baseball, if you will. But that's more of the philosophy of how we approach it.
Yeah.
As it relates to cannabis, one of the things that we do react to in the States is there's been this drumbeat of trying to open up markets very quickly. And, there's a lot of frustration around New York State, for example, not legalizing last year. And, I don't think we were very popular because we said this on the dais in a couple of different conferences. Actually, we said it on the tails of some very influential people in the cannabis industry saying that, New York was an idiot and as a state, they should have opened up immediately. And we go the other way. We say this is really the dawn of a new industry. We have one chance to get it right. And because, as I was saying earlier, that the history of cannabis is in this really negative family and community breaking stigma and bias, that it's now time that as we form the industry, that we actually are focused on inclusion. And that means inclusion of communities that have been damaged by the war on drugs. And those are typically in the US, communities of color. It goes to where I was living for the last 8 years running an impact fund, which is the entire isthmus of Mexico down into South America, because that's been the narco trafficking corridors. And those pathways have been paved in the blood of the locals to get illicit product to the US market. And it goes to a global stigma around how cannabis is seen as a sort of lower end, not an accepted way of either consuming a medical or meeting a medical need or consuming a legal libation. So I think that our drumbeat is a little bit slower, and we, again, back thoughtful progress. And we hope that the industry is going to be built on foundational elements that, as I said, are impact oriented today, but should just be kind of called business in the future. And it should be, race, gender, socioeconomic class blind and inclusive across all borders. That would be our hope anyway.
Yeah, huge amounts there. And I mean, we could have a whole show just on this aspect of things. So much to unpick.
The one thing I'd say is that one of the amazing things about cannabis, and this goes to guys that have been, suffering through like the camp timeframe in California, the entire Emerald Triangle of Northern California has been sort of, seen as the bad actors. But the reality is that the people that have been carrying sort of the cannabis torch throughout the last many decades have been kind of true believers in a lot of these ideals. And I think that, you do want to remove kind of the criminal element. You do want to remove the corruption that can come with what was an illicit drugs trade. But the kernel here in cannabis is actually really positive. And it's a very community-oriented and inclusive bias that entrepreneurs and founding cannabis operators have. And so, as we come into it, we come from a very established perch of coming out of, Goldman and other kind of full-scale investment banks, JP Morgan and Mesoamerica. And so we're bringing our credibility and experience to an industry that really has the bones of what should be a vibrant and impact-oriented revenue stream that's going to build into the future. So it's not like we have to, turn a battleship. I think that the cannabis industry is already oriented towards these ideals. And we're here just to put our lens and our structure around it and accelerate what's already been done before us.
Yeah, definitely. I had Steve D'Angelo on, very fortunately.
I love Steve. Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago. Yeah, and he speaks to a lot of what you just mentioned from all aspects, from the Last Prisoner project to his amazing advocacy work he's done over the decades. And so, loads of stuff that he talks about. And also from my personal experience, the people that I meet are definitely motivated in a different way and want to make change. There's not to say that there aren't significant amount of short-term people in it as well.
Yeah.
And I think, the Canadian public markets demonstrated that last year. And, there's loads of that. But I think there is definitely a good sort of spirit to a lot of what people are trying to do. And hopefully those guys can be the winners as well.
Yeah, I really hope so. And yeah, there has been a lot of kind of running to the green rush of cannabis. I do think that will subside. You'll never, obviously it's going to be a huge cash generative industry for quite some time. So there's going to draw, all sorts coming into it. But I do think that the core substance of the industry is very well based. And that goes to, how I see what had been a clash between sort of authority and grower or, industry versus regulator. I see those walls falling. There's definitely drawbridges coming down for more dialogue and communication. And it certainly happened in the States from sort of the state referendum side of the populace coming up. And the hope would be that here in Europe, people are seeing the opportunity from a medicinal side and realizing that they have an underserved population of patients. So that's the opening dialogue. And then beyond that, it goes to more of a libertarian process of, what do you want to restrict or not restrict for people to do? And if it's safe and can be controlled and regulated, it can be a win-win for all parties. So that would be our long-term focus and hope.
Yeah, fantastic. And, I hope that too.
Yeah.
So, we're just getting towards the end of the show. So my usual last question is, what did your parents say when you told them you were starting a cannabis business? But you kind of alluded a bit to your family and the kind of sort of family health issues that they've had. Was it a difficult conversation in any way, or were there certain parts of your family that are kind of less keen on you getting involved with this plant?
So it's funny, I told you my sister's experience. My father, I come from a family, both my parents were doctors. My mother passed away, but my father's still alive. And it actually wasn't even my parents, it was more of our friends. I was like, almost whispering that I was going into cannabis because we'd been running this impact investment firm based in Costa Rica, holistic. And even then, in just a social group, the stigma around cannabis was still very real. And these were early days when we were even thinking about doing it. And that's only a couple of years ago. So I kind of whispered around to people because we also had LPs that we still were investing their capital that didn't look very fondly on cannabis. So I didn't want the word to get out, so to speak, that we were starting to explore this area. And I did have this conversation with my dad about cannabis, and he kind of looked at me for a long time and he's like, "That is such a wonderful idea," with this very heavy German accent. And it was exactly the opposite. Not that he would ever say anything that would be negative, but to be so, maybe it was just more of a testament of his relationship to me, but he was so encouraging. And he said, at his age, among his peers, there's been a lot of talk about it. As I was saying, it's not necessarily living longer, but living better. And my dad is now, he's 89. He'll be 90 in October this year. And he's like, look, getting old sucks. You have these aches and pains and things don't work. And if there's something else out there that's safe that can make me feel a little bit better and I can use it when I need to use it and it's an enhancement to my life, well, why wouldn't I want to have that? So it was actually a very easy rollover. And eventually, we were already fully invested. So my old LPs, it became a non-issue at some point in time. But it was funny how it went from kind of a whispered secret to all of a sudden this great embrace to now being on a podcast and talking about cannabis.
It's fantastic, isn't it? I love those things when you're expecting it to go one way and
I know.
You're pleasantly surprised. So good on your dad for being very forward thinking, I think.
It's great.
Yeah, good. Cool. Oh, thank you, Will. It's been great to chat to you. And yeah, lots of exciting things. And we could have probably gone on a bit further about some of the other things that Artemis is up to as well. But perhaps that's a good reason for you to come back and join us again at some point.
Happy to come back anytime. Thanks for having us on, letting me talk about Artemis and our views, and really appreciate what you're doing for the industry. And you have a great show. So thanks for having us.
Great. Thank you, Will. Cheers.
Cheers.